tell the African story with clarity, pride, and purpose, reaching audiences that matter to your brand. Partner with us and connect your business with listeners across borders in multiple languages and markets. For partnership opportunities, sponsorship, or sales, email us at partnership@channelafrica.co.za. Channel Africa, the African perspective. It's time for Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla. Stay tuned for insights, impact, and inspiration right here on Channel Africa. Available on the Channel Africa app.
And it's 9 p.m. this Friday, the 19th of December, 2025. A very warm welcome to you. This is Africa World Hour on Channel Africa. I am Tsepiso Makwetla. Coming up in this hour, the EU decides to borrow cash to loan 90 billion euros to the Ukraine in its war efforts against Russia over the next 2 years. And diplomatic tensions between South Africa and the US escalate as the US condemns South Africa's recent detention of US officials. It says we're providing support to the Afrikaner minority group. All that coming up, and we take a look at your news headlines now.
1 hour, one continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Start with news in the DRC. Rwanda-backed M23 rebels have begun withdrawing from the eastern Congolese town of Uvira in an effort to support US-backed peace efforts. The rebels had indicated on Monday that they would withdraw to help efforts by US President Donald Trump's administration and Qatar to mediate between the warring parties, between the rebels and the Congolese government forces. This report by Reuters news agency.
A truck carrying M23 soldiers drives out of the eastern Congolese town of Uvira. That is, as the Rwanda-backed rebels began withdrawing from the region in support of a US-backed peace effort. Group leaders promised to complete the pullout by Thursday. The rebels have captured large swaths of territory in eastern Congo over the past 3 years. They entered Uvira near the Burundi border earlier this month. That was less than a week after the presidents of Congo and Rwanda met with US President Donald Trump to reaffirm their commitment to a peace deal known as the Washington Accords.
Meanwhile, Ukraine's president has suggested that the country is not ready to drop the aspirations of joining NATO military alliance. This comes days after Volodymyr Zelensky suggested that Ukraine would be willing to make such a step in exchange for robust security guarantees. William Densler reports from Brussels.
Following talks between US and Ukrainian officials in the German capital Berlin several days ago, it was reported that Ukraine was prepared to conceivably give up its aspirations of joining NATO in exchange for robust security guarantees from the US and Europe, something that US officials described as the platinum standard when it came to that security for Ukraine. But speaking at a press conference here at the European Council on Thursday, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky suggested that might not be the case, suggesting that he wasn't willing for the country to change its constitution to rule out aspirations of joining the military alliance. Now, of course, those security guarantees for Ukraine seen as absolutely pivotal as peace talks progress. We can expect that to be absolutely central to much of the conversations as US and Ukrainian delegations meet again for what's expected to be 2 days of talks in the United States. William Denslow, SABC News, Brussels.
The South African Police Service National Commissioner General Fani Masemola and Western Cape Police top brass are presiding over an operation to destroy confiscated liquor as part of the SAPS's festive season operations. Here's the SAPS's National Commissioner Fani Masemola addressing the media.
As police, we made sure that those illegal liquor outlets, we close them down. And when we close, such liquor get confiscated. We go to court and get it confiscated to the state. So today we have destroyed 20,000 all different types of liquor. So all those drums that you see there is what members have pumped in there since the morning. So it's 20,000 liters of alcohol that, of course, we have got trained people that know the environment, knows where to go and scientifically go and dispose of this. So we take that out of communities. Liquor is one of the generators of crime, and not only in Western Cape but across the country. But for Western Cape, this is what we are destroying today. And unfortunately, some of those things that is some of the work that we have to do as the police.
The Central African Republic has embraced opaque cryptocurrency schemes that raise the risk of state assets being captured by foreign criminal organizations. President Faustin Archange Touadera says the shift to digital currencies will deliver prosperity to citizens by raising funds from non-traditional sources to pay for infrastructure and other projects. Analysts, why do you expect him to win the election? This report by Reuters News Agency.
Central African Republic has embraced opaque crypto schemes that could endanger state assets. That's according to a report published ahead of this month's national election. President Faustin Archange Touadera is seeking a third term in office in a country which has seen decades of coups, rebellions and unrest. Since taking office in 2016, he's emerged as a champion of cryptocurrency. In 2022, CAR became the first African country and the second nation in the world to adopt Bitcoin as an official currency. CAR also launched a meme coin this year, a highly volatile token, which was marred with setbacks. Touadera has said this shift to digital will deliver prosperity to citizens, insisting that raising funds from non-traditional sources would pay for infrastructure and other projects.
And those are our top stories this hour.
Mornings made better with Peter and Asanda on Rise and Shine, weekdays 6 till 9.
The South African Medical Association, SAMA, has officially suspended all relations with the Israeli Medical Association, a move welcomed by healthcare workers for Palestine, South Africa. The organization says this decision represents a powerful stand for medical ethics, justice, and human rights, echoing the global call for solidarity with Palestinians.
And recently, we've also seen other national associations, such as the British Medical Association, Turkish. They've released quite strongly worded statements, although none have gone as far as SAMA to cut ties with the Israeli Medical Association, as well as to call for the suspension from the World Medical Association. It's a watershed moment that an organization has actually taken this step. And it's not an idle threat. SAMA is a member of the World Medical Association, and they can action this resolution by bringing it before the World Medical Association.
Dr. Sadiq Mullah, chairperson of Healthcare Workers for Palestine, South Africa.
Mornings made better with Peter and Asanda on Rise and Shine. Keep Africa in your hands. Connect to our website for all your news, sports, and cultural updates. channelafrica.co.za. Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on Africa World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
And this is, of course, the program that brings you the late news update, what's happening in and around your world, from the heart of Africa to all corners of the globe, bringing you the voices, the faces, and the perspectives that matter. Welcome to it. I'm Tsepiso Makwetla. Thank you for joining us. The European Union leaders have decided to extend a cash loan of about $105 billion US dollars to Ukraine to fund defense against Russia for the next 2 years, rather than use frozen Russian assets. The leaders also gave the European Commission mandate to keep working on a so-called reparations loan based on Russian immobilized assets, an option that proved unworkable for now due to resistance from Belgium, where bulk of the assets are being held. For more on this, we are joined on the line by Simon Allen Handy, the Executive Director at Handy Concept for Connecting People, or HCCP, a global think tank institute. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Simon.
Yeah, I'm speaking to you live from Boston Logan Airport, where you
Oh,
where
great.
you just got me.
Oh, well, thank you for taking the time. So let's just talk
I
about,
am between my.
yeah. So, Simon, what are your thoughts about this? And what could be the strategic objectives rather of the EU in doing this?
I think the strategic rationale as we speak is increasingly opaque. What began as emergency aid has metastasized now into an open-ended war financing mechanism without an exit strategy. I believe that the European Union appears locked into a logic of escalation by default rather than strategy by design. The costs are staggering up to now, the timelines undefined, and the oversight risks are immense, particularly in a wartime environment in Ukraine, which was deemed one of the most corrupt countries on the planet, with weakened state institutions. So there is no credible guarantee that such a massive influx will be deployed with the necessary transparency. This trajectory is especially troubling given that the EU itself, as I have shown in many works in the past, was founded to make war on the continent unthinkable. So today, Europe seems to have forgotten its own DNA. And as I argue in the ABC of the United Nations General Assembly, which provide, by the way, the scaffolding and the only blueprint for viable peace plan between Russia and Ukraine. There is no military solution to this war of attrition. European leaders must return to first principles and align with serious diplomatic efforts rather than perpetuating an unwinnable stalemate.
And as I mentioned, the fact that there is a resistance from Belgium in handing over the Russian assets that are in its care. Is this a crack in the plan that European leaders had, and just in terms of how they felt that they would be able to squeeze Russia?
Yeah, I mean, there is no international legal framework that provides for the stealing of, foreign asset of a foreign country. The core problem isn't just who pays, but it's whether the money survives the journey into fragile wartime administrative system in Ukraine. The financial burden will fall, in my view, disproportionately on the EU largest economies, primarily Germany and France, where you have rocking chair warriors and trigger-happy presidents, through collective borrowing mechanism. So this effectively, I think, mutualizes risk across the European taxpayer. However, as I have stated before in the preliminary remarks I made in this interview, injecting massive capital into systems with limited absorptive capacity and systemic governance challenges is fiscally reckless and strategically naive. Without an ironclad accountability mechanism, we are risking billions on a hope that institutional integrity can survive the pressures of total war.
And how would they finance this loan? And also, most importantly, how are they going to explain the financial risk to their citizens?
I'm not sure how they're going to explain it because there is no fever for war. I mean, there is no real attraction in Europe in the public opinion right now. And I think, as you have seen, there is a systematic effort on the part of the Trump administration to bring this war to an end. And as you have seen, Europe is financing the state. The United States is arming the front. And this division of labor has sustained the conflict, but it has not resolved it. So while the U.S. focuses on military hardware and intelligence, Europe has led on direct financial support. As Linda Biles, one of the best specialists, has demonstrated in her work, the true cost of war, these arrangements often enrich only the war economy, as you see, while hollowing out public finances and political legitimacy in the donor state. So the result here is likely a conflict that feeds itself institutionally, and even as strategic clarity erodes, and it will not have public support, neither in America nor in Europe.
And just juxtaposing this proposed $105 billion loan package from EU countries against the current support of the United States, how is that going to work?
I mean, the message on the part of the European is unambiguous. The war must continue. And this is a rejection of de-escalations in favor of faulty assumptions. As you know, this loan rests on the assumption that the United States will indefinitely underwrite Europe's security without reservation. That assumption is collapsing. I mean, the love fest between Europe and America, which was always, in my view, a sordid affair, has now become a full-blown situationship that will likely end into a messy divorce. So the transatlantic relationship, long portrayed as value-based alliance, increasingly resembles fragile transactional arrangement. Europe behaves as though it possesses strategic autonomy, yet it lacks the structural independence to back it up. So this mismatch between ambition and capability is deeply destabilizing. And I think that no more funding without a framework will only entrench hardliners and incentivize further bloodshed.
And just also, how might future legal actions by Russia, for example, lawsuits against Euroclear and EU entities, constrain or complicate the EU's ability to finance war efforts in favor of Ukraine?
There is no hunger for war in Europe, and people are really getting tired of the war itself. I will actually err on the side of a response, because what is urgently needed is not another financial tranche, but as I have stated it before, an international contact group, and I think that is an idea that Secretary Rubio and President Trump have embraced, composed of seasoned diplomat, military strategist, and regional expert. Its mandate should be to identify realistic zones of convergence and design a credible plan. So history will judge us, all of us, harshly if we continue to provide the capital for war while remaining bankrupt of the ideas required for peace. We need, and Europe particularly, needs structured peace architecture, one that prioritizes diplomatic innovation over escalation.
And as you talk about the geopolitical impact of this, what response do you think we ought to expect from the US president, given the fact that he and his administration say they're working very hard at achieving peace between the two parties?
I think that on the contrary, it is more likely to entrench hardliners in Russia and incentivize further escalations. But I think that the determination shown by the White House is rock solid. And I think what is urgently needed, once again, is not another financial tranche, but that international contact group composed of seasoned diplomats, military strategists, economists, and regional experts. Its mandate should be to identify the realistic zones of convergence, design security guarantees, and construct a credible outcome from the violence. Absent such a framework, additional funding merely prolongs the bloodshed, and history will judge that fairly harshly.
Thank you so much for speaking to us. Simon Alain Handy is the Executive Director at Handy Concept for Connecting People, or HCCP, a global think tank institute, speaking to us about European leaders' latest move to extend $105 billion loan to Ukraine in order to help it fight Russia over the next 2 years.
Keep Africa in your hands. Connect to our website for all your news, sports, and cultural updates. channelafrica.co.za. Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on African World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m. 1 hour, one continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa. the African perspective. Keep Africa in your hands. Connect to our website for all your news, sports, and cultural updates. channelafrica.co.za.
The United States has condemned South Africa's recent detention of U.S. officials who it said were providing support to the Afrikaner minority group. Two U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services refugee officers were briefly detained and then released during an operation on Tuesday. South Africa has since deported 7 Kenyan nationals illegally working on processing refugee applications for the U.S. government. The Kenyan nationals were arrested and deported for illegally working in South Africa while in possession of tourist visas following an intelligence-driven operation in Johannesburg. We will be speaking shortly to Dr. Charles Sinkala, an international relations expert, on what this means, and of course look at this from the lens of US-SA diplomatic relations, which we know have been really tenuous over the past couple of months. And if really there could be any salvaging of relations, but also what does it mean for South Africa's sovereignty for the US to be deploying its immigration service officials to South Africa to work on processing visas for this group of refugees, and we're talking about minority Afrikaner group members who are going to the US under the guise of them facing genocidal action from the South African government. And we'll come back to that. Leo Bozell has been confirmed by the United States Senate to be that country's next ambassador to South Africa. Bozell's nomination by President Donald Trump in March raised concerns. Given Bozell's history as an anti-ANC activist during the apartheid years, the media critic and conservative activist nomination had to pass through several legislative steps, including a hearing before the Senate's Foreign Relations Committee in October, before being put to the vote in the Senate this month. Tutongo Beni compiled this report.
Leo Bozell's confirmation by the government of the United States as ambassador of South Africa comes at a time when both countries are having diplomatic tensions. South Africa hosted the G20 Leaders Summit last month, with the US making a U-turn at the 11th hour and sending a junior official to receive the G20 presidency handover from the Southern African nation. In turn, South Africa refused to hand over this to the junior official, with the US responding by disinviting South Africa to the G20 Sherpas meeting. The tension has been simmering due to many other issues, including South Africa taking Israel to the International Criminal Court for genocide in Gaza, and President Donald Trump claiming that there's a genocide on Afrikaners in South Africa, with the claim being untrue. In March this year, South Africa's ambassador to the United States, Ibrahim Rasool, was sent back home for criticizing Trump's leadership style and is yet to be replaced. Meanwhile, the U.S. has not had an ambassador in South Africa since January, following the resignation of Ruben Brigetti ahead of the Trump administration taking charge. Bozell, a media critic and conservative activist, was an anti-ANC activist back in the 1980s during the apartheid era. Speaking in Congress ahead of his confirmation, Bozell said he was opposed to the ANC and the former president Nelson Mandela due to their proximity to the Soviet Union.
I'm not aware of what you did, Senator, but I can tell you what our position was as conservatives back in the 1980s. ANC and Nelson Mandela at that time were aligned with the Soviet Union, which was the biggest threat to peace in the world and the mortal enemy of the United States. As such, we were in opposition.
Okay.
I think, Senator, at the same time, it's an extraordinary evolution that 10 years later, approximately, when the wall came down and that association ended, so too did the relationship that the conservative movement had with Nelson Mandela. If I'm asked today, who do I think is the most revered person in South Africa? Who do I have the most respect for? It would be Nelson Mandela.
Honorary Professor of International Relations at the University of the Witwatersrand, Professor John J. Streamlaw, says Bozell doesn't have any political credentials as he had never heard of him before his nomination as the ambassador.
I never heard of Brent Bozell before he was nominated because he was basically president and founder of the Media Research Center, a conservative media outlet that watches the liberal press and alleged biases and critiques them. So I don't think he's had any foreign affairs experience to speak of, although he did take an anti-ANC position under apartheid, and that was largely, I think, a result of the fact that most of the establishment press was urging for support for the struggle. And also, once Mandela had been released from prison, and then it was then a cause of great interest on the part of the U.S. establishment press.
Streamlaw says he doesn't foresee Bozell having much influence in South Africa.
So I don't see that Brent Bozell will have much influence in South Africa, but I can trust and defer to Durko on that.
Meanwhile, veteran U.S. diplomat, author, and journalist Brooks Spector says Bozell will not be able to promote his personal views as he has to carry out the policies of his country as an ambassador.
There's no question that Mr. Bozell has rather significantly conservative views, and he's had them for many years. He's been a public figure in a variety of ways, mostly as a writer and as a speaker. Those views, if we're talking, let's say, if we're talking 40 years ago, he was not a fan of the liberation movements in South Africa. That's public knowledge. But, he's accepted the appointment, and in his confirmation hearing, he said his task will be to carry out the policies of the man who appointed him, that is the president, and that's what an ambassador does. Their job is to represent the country and the administration, not necessarily their own views unless they happen to coincide.
However, Spector is of the view that Bozell's tenure in South Africa is set to be an interesting one as he's not shy to speak up.
Having said all of that, it's quite clear that his views and some of the views of the South African government will not entirely be parallel and in agreement. And so it's going to be an interesting tenure when he gets here. He's not shy. He will be, I suspect, an object of great interest on the part of the South African mass media, who will want to interview him and who will want to find out what he thinks about any number of issues, and I suspect will rise to that occasion and agree to be interviewed and ask for comment and then give it. And I think that will be an interesting tenure.
For Channel Africa News, I am Tutongobeni in Johannesburg.
The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, is set to abolish air transport taxes from January the 1st, 2026 in a move aimed at lowering the cost of air travel across the region. The bloc has also announced a 25% reduction in passenger and security-related aviation charges from next year. Channel Africa's economics reporter now examines the significance of this decision and what it could mean for airlines and regional connectivity.
The measures follows a decision taken by ECOWAS heads of state and government at their summit in Abuja in December 2024. Economist and managing director and CEO of Timeline Consult Limited in Nigeria, Shobi Idris, shares his perspective on the economic significance of ECOWAS' decision to abolish air transport taxes.
One needs to interrogate what are the concomitant features of a typical airline ticket. Number one, airline companies do try to price their ticket on a basis or on the basis of a number of factors. Chief among them is the cost of fuel. When and where ATK, otherwise known as aviation fuel, the international price increase, obviously airline operators will have to increase, their tickets because cost of operation would have increased. Secondly, the cost of buying an aircraft. Yes, an aircraft can be in service for 15, 20 years or even longer.
He says the move has the potential to encourage economic activities.
When and where the prices are relatively low, it encourage economic activities. It encourage boom. When and where prices are high, people can't afford it. Movement is restricted and activities could slow down. So obviously, if there is a reduction in taxation or an abolishment of a certain tax leading to a reduction in price of airline tickets, obviously that will signal, the fact that passengers could be enticed, to engage in trips.
But what impact could this reform have on regional trade, tourism, and business mobility in Western Africa, particularly for Nigeria as one of the region's largest aviation and economic hubs? Adeniyi Efatayo, CEO of Megastar Media Communications, shares his perspective.
The ECOWAS decision to abolish air transport taxes so that to reduce the cost of a flight within that region is a good one, is a commendable one, and it will also, just like it will ease movement and it will increase more movement within the ECOWAS sub-region. And as well, like you said, that insinuating whether the airline will pass the cost saving to the passenger. So there has to be monitoring from ECOWAS, different country ministry of aviation. Then they need to monitor. They know how much the a 1 hour journey flight ticket costs. How much is it now after the implementation? It's not just about making the policy. They should make sure that all the policies are implemented into they are followed up.
He also agrees that the move is expected to boost regional trade across the bloc.
We give more trade, more regional trade, and also in terms of tourism, people want to visit ECOWAS states. They want to see what they have for holiday, for vacation, for visit, and of course, business mobility. We can do more businesses because sometimes when you look at the cost that made up, transportation is very key. And when you are talking about air transportation, sometimes it's most expensive.
For Channel Africa News, I'm Innocent Simos in Johannesburg.
Now, the latest report by the Water Community Action Network, WaterCan, has found that drinking water in all 9 provinces of South Africa is unsafe. The findings are based on the organization's Citizen Science Water Testing Week, which shows that the country's water crisis has reached emergency levels. The report points to widespread contamination of rivers and to failing wastewater infrastructure, posing a very serious threat to public health. WaterCan is now calling for urgent municipal and provincial interventions to address the crisis in affected municipalities and prevent further deterioration of water quality. For more on this, we're on the line to WaterCan Campaigns Coordinator Nhlanhla Tsepiso. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Good evening to you, and thank you for the invite.
So if we're to give a percentage in terms of the water safety levels of water in all of these provinces that we speak of, how would you grade it? How would you rate it?
So to start with, I would say that what WaterCan did, we did sampling, as you rightfully said in your intro, with community volunteers and in all the 9 provinces, which we also upload onto our website, where we show what tests we did. We did over 123 samples. We took over 123 samples. And from that, we found that the majority of those samples that were actually taken are actually unsafe in terms of water quality. And we're talking about conforming, especially with water that come from taps. We talk about E. coli with water that has been tested that comes from dams and streams. those kind of things. So it's quite a high number if you look at the sampling that we did of the 123. So I would say that it's quite, which is one of the the reasons why we actually wrote the report, because of the high quality of unsafe, the high number of unsafe water.
And we've already mentioned what the base problems are, but I suppose the most important thing is whether or not government, municipalities are doing regular, checkups, testing, and are they reporting it to communities about the levels of contamination?
So that's the biggest concern that we have, because there's not much awareness that we are seeing across the country in terms of, making people aware. And we know that we are not the only ones who have actually written a report on the quality of water in South Africa. And the concern is that there's not enough awareness that has actually been created at the local level and at the provincial level, which is one of the things that we're actually recommending and demanding that those two levels actually look at. But also that there be regular testing, because for us to have more verifiable information, it would be good to have a lot of testing, all testing, if I may put it this way, by the different municipalities, so that they understand the quality of water that they're giving to the citizens. But also amongst those things, that regular testing that needs to be done, there has to be some level of transparency in actually sharing that, because we have seen in some instances, look at what happened in the Hammanskraal area, for example, where the water quality was so bad, and we've had outbreaks of diseases in those communities. So it's very important that the awareness is also created at the local and as well as the provincial level, not only by NGOs like ourselves as WaterCan, but it could be done better.
And what specific contaminants were you able to detect in the drinking water sources and rivers across South Africa?
So what we are looking at is, for example, coliform, especially from tap water. And that is a type of pollutant that actually makes the water to be unsafe. But when it comes to streams and dams, we have actually picked up, E. coli. And this is mainly as a result of fecal bacteria. And this is actually unsafe for consumption. So amongst the things that we have also picked up is the level of phosphates in the water, and it's as a result also the contamination that we're talking about. It's as a result also of the level of chemicals that we find in the different water streams that we have tested. So it's quite high in terms of human consumption. There are levels where even though it's not advisable for communities to drink, but it's advisable for communities to be made aware that at least they should boil their water so that it doesn't lead into any kind of outbreak.
And that's what I'm trying to determine, just how bad the situation is, because I believe of the 500 sample kits that you distributed, only about 132 to 139 actually updated or uploaded the results.
Yeah, just to give a perspective in terms of the sampling or the testing that actually be done, that gets to be done by the communities, a lot of them are actually learning how to use the kits. So we may have distributed around 500, but it doesn't mean that all of them were actually done, successfully. But from those that have been done successfully, that's where our report actually makes the claim that the levels of contamination is quite high. So yes, based on that, I would also say that, to answer your question, that for us it's the quality, because in some instances, as mentioned also in the report, in some instances it's right at the source at where you and I actually get our drinking water, our cooking water, etc. And that's an indication that there's a seepage into the system, or there's actually a contamination that's coming out from outside sources that's going into our water storage systems, or our water, our taps, etc. And that is a concern, because at the end of the day, it tells us that there needs to be a heightened level of maintenance that's actually done, as much as a heightened level of testing the water at source that we consume.
You mentioned about 8 municipalities that were found to be mostly at risk. Which municipalities are these, and are you able to point out exactly where they're failing most?
Yes. So the majority of these municipalities that we actually picked up at where they're failing at is, doing proper testing and also making that testing aware to, to communities. And just to give you a quick rundown on those municipalities, we're talking about Sedibeng, we're talking about King Gajwayo, Hertsibande in Pumalanga, Waterberg, we're talking about Boja Nala, Platinum District Municipality, the Johannesburg Metro, Mopani Metro, as well as Pixley Gaseme, Metro. So those 8, that's where we were able to get community activists to actually do testing, and from the testing that was done in those municipalities, we picked up these pollutants that we're actually talking about. And that's the reason why we're actually highlighting these municipalities, because it's also part of our way of actually letting them know that there is something wrong with the water system and they should do something about it. And we're hoping that they will start taking action.
I'd imagine that this situation already exacerbates an already existing inequality in terms of access to safe drinking water. Just how dire is the situation? And I'm thinking particularly of informal settlements, or where there is no easily accessible piped water.
Yeah. So to start with, there's this assumption in some circles that is usually found in your rural areas, and also in the informal area, but also with from municipalities that I've mentioned, that this also is occurring in the urban areas. And it comes in different forms, because some of the testing that we actually did, we did it from water tankers, we did them, as I said, from streams and dams. And it shows that, at source, including JoJo tanks, by the way, it shows that at source where we consume that this level is. So to answer your question directly, it is concerning for us, which is one of the reasons that we actually write this report every year. It is concerning because at the end of the day, besides water being a basic need that we all need, but the safety of it also speaks to how, especially mostly, the vulnerable people are actually impacted by this. Some people, in terms of their health, maybe their immune systems are not as strong as maybe yourself or myself. And you find that one of the concerns that we're raising is that there should be a heightened level of awareness that's actually created, so that the impact doesn't become dire. And one of the things that we're also saying that, as much as we had what we refer to as the electricity load shedding, which was a national crisis, even the water quality that we're talking about, it is a national crisis, and which is why we actually did a spread of doing testing in all 9 provinces to prove this point. And so to avoid the impact, as you are saying, the impact that it has on people, it's precisely that. So we need to look at our systems, our water systems, our storage systems, etc., including all the overflow that we are seeing in some of our streams, especially when it comes to fecal bacteria, etc. It's quite high, so it's concerning. And in some instances, especially if you look at streams and rivers, as South Africans would know, most of them, we use those water sources in terms of doing customary, things. So at the end of the day, all those water sources should actually be tested to make sure that people are not impacted.
Mm. And has there been, in your assessment, a direct correlation with the extent of waterborne diseases and the local public health systems, the number of cases that have been reported there? Because I know last year we saw quite a huge spike in cholera cases. Have you been able to draw a direct link between the poor water quality and infrastructure and the public health implications?
Yeah. So one of the reasons that we actually publish these reports is because of the much publicized cases, as you rightfully said, or that has a direct impact, especially on communities. The infections that they are picking up, etc. And as you mentioned, like cholera. So by us drawing, this report was actually basically to make and see if there is that correlation, and we believe that there is. It may not be in every municipality in which we tested, but there are areas that have been of concern and where we've seen some outbreak happening. And when you look at the water quality tells us that there is a direct correlation to that. So that cannot be ruled out in the sense that we know that waterborne diseases do come from water that is not of good quality, and it does have that impact. So we're not ruling that out.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Water Cans Campaigns Coordinator Nhlanhla Tsepiso, just speaking about the quality of water and access to it in various parts of South Africa.
Get Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Channel 802. Mornings made better with Peter and Asanda on Rise and Shine, weekdays 6 till 9.
The South African Medical Association, SAMA, has officially suspended all relations with the Israeli Medical Association, a move welcomed by healthcare workers for Palestine, South Africa. The organization says this decision represents a powerful stand for medical ethics, justice, and human rights, echoing the global call for solidarity with Palestinians.
And recently we've also seen other national associations such as the British Medical Association, Turkish. They've released quite strongly worded statements, although none have gone as far as SAMA to cut ties with the Israeli Medical Association, as well as to call for the suspension from the World Medical Association. It's a watershed moment that an organization has actually taken this step. And it's not an idle threat. SAMA is a member of the World Medical Association, and they can action this resolution by bringing it before the World Medical Association.
Dr. Sadiq Mullah, chairperson of Healthcare Workers for Palestine, South Africa.
Mornings made better with Peter and Asanda on Rise and Shine. Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on Africa World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
Right, let's go back to that story about the U.S. condemning South Africa's recent detention of U.S. officials who it said were providing support to Afrikaner minority groups. The two U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services refugee officers were briefly detained and then released during an operation on Tuesday. South Africa has since deported 7 Kenyan nationals illegally working on processing refugee applications for the U.S. government. The Kenyan nationals were arrested and deported for illegally working in South Africa while in possession of tourist visas following an intelligence-driven operation in Johannesburg. To discuss this, we're joined by Dr. Charles Sinkala, an international relations expert. Dr. Sinkala, very good evening to you. It just, came to me that when a country establishes a foreign mission in another country, I'd imagine that there are rules and regulations governing it. And even though the other country enjoys autonomy in terms of who they allow in their country, how does it work that the US is basically just working on refugee papers for a minority of South African nationals on South African soil?
Well, thank you very much for having me once again, Tsepiso. Good evening to you and the listeners. Unfortunately, United States of America works on its own terms, and I think it's unfortunately that under the presidency of Donald Trump, we have seen that we have waved away from the United Nations Charter in terms of the Vienna Convention, in terms of diplomatic processes, in terms of addressing issues or engaging with other nations. We have seen a lack of, following of processes like what you've mentioned, that there's no way South Africa will establish an arm of government through the embassy, operating into United States of America and, conducting activities in the name of government without bilateral agreements or notification from the United States government. And unfortunately, this has been a one-way road where United States of America feels that they are above other nations, nations that they can even sanction, and they can unilaterally decide and recruit um, foreign nationals into another territory which they have got no control or jurisdiction without following the processes. And this is the results. And I'm happy that South Africa has taken this step.
And in this case, what South African officials are saying in terms of the reasons why they detained these two U.S. officials, do we know the legal precedent for it?
Well, the precedence which has been established that once we have the United States Embassy in South Africa, one in Pretoria, one in Rivonia, Catherine Street in Sandton. All these follows the protocol where if anyone has to be employed, they have to follow the processes and procedures as enshrined by the South African government through the international relations and the diplomatic cooperation, where one have to follow the process in terms of employment, processes, and there's no any other way or two where one will be, by virtue of United States of America having established the embassy or consulate within the South African boundaries, that they can unilaterally employ somebody from outside. If it was a South African citizen, where a works permit or permits rather to be within the Republic is not required, it's another story. But where they've employed, Kenyan citizens, and offer them employment on a visitor's permit, it's quite unfortunate because a visitor's permit carries a mandate that one who is only visiting, either a tourist for temporary visiting, but if they are there for either employment or investment, there's a separate visa that has to be followed. But if United States of America can do that, one just think of what other things that United States of America performs within the Republic.
And the U.S. response that it is warning of severe consequences to South Africa's actions, which you say are illegal and of which there is precedent. How does then one interpret that within the context of South Africa's sovereignty?
Well, I think if we veer out Tsepiso from the employment they have employed people for many years, and
yes, you can go ahead, Dr. Sankara.
I think yes, I think it's to the large extent we have witnessed that there is a pipe in the relations between United States of America and South Africa. And it has fallen off in terms of where United States of America government, especially under like to rewrite South African international policies, especially where South Africa feels that Israel violated the international protocol in terms of Palestine and the Gaza wars, and many other wars which South Africa feels that United States of America has overseen. These are just, the impact of the deep, diplomatic spat, that as like a fallen,
All right.
bilateral agreements, fallen.
Right. Dr. Sinkana, I'm going to just give it one last bash because the line it is not really great. But there's obviously these competing narratives where, as you say, South Africa is asserting its own, legal rights, really. And there is the U.S. assertion that of refugee protection, humanitarian advocacy. So just within line with future relations between these two countries, just how fraught is it?
Sorry, Tsepiso, I missed you out there. What was your question?
So I was saying, there's obviously these competing narratives. There is the US that's playing the whole refugee protection, humanitarian advocacy, and South Africa's response is that of asserting its legal authority. For future US-South Africa diplomatic relations, what does it mean, or is it an already fraught situation?
Well, it's already a fraught situation at Tsepiso. You and I, we've got wind of these diplomatic spots that are in the media. Usually certain tensions such as this are dealt with on a diplomatic level. I think I'll end there, I don't want to go further there. Once we see that the laundry is in public, then there's deep concerns that has actually escalated to lead to that point. Usually certain issues such as, passports not being legally updated, or citizens or foreigners being employed by the United States of America. It could have happened as well where, for some reasons at the embassy of South Africa in Washington, they could have maybe one or two employees employed by South Africa to work at the embassy who their visas might have maybe expired or almost to expire. And those are dealt with on a diplomatic level without, any news or, citizens or others getting wind of it. But once it gets out of hand, where diplomatic means has failed, and this is what we see. And I think if the relationships are not mended, largely to the extent of the United States of America, I think South Africa cannot bend backwards more than it has done in terms of the relations. And I think we're happy in terms of the international community, African countries, SADC and the AU, who has supported. I'm just disappointed, in the terms where now we have the G20 summit being hosted in the United States of America, where South Africa was asked a very important question: should they gather, support from African countries, in terms of holding United States to account? Why will they, remove South Africa, who is just an immediate president in terms of the G20, hosting the G20 in South Africa, and who was just handed over, and they repudiate the invitation, and South Africa said they cannot, gather other African countries or the world countries, towards bringing United States to account. I think we have to look at how Ukraine, did in terms of the European Union, and how they addressed the United States of America. We have to reach at that point, where United States of America needs adult supervision.
Well, we thank you for your time and insights, Dr. Charles Sinkala, international relations expert, just speaking about the latest on the rift between South Africa, ever-growing rift actually between South Africa and the United States, and this time over the detention of U.S. Refugee immigration officials and the deportation of 7 Kenyans who were in South Africa working illegally to process documents, refugee documents for minority Afrikaner groups or individuals who want to go to the US under the guise of them facing genocide here in South Africa. And that's how we come to the end of Africa World Hour this evening. And thank you to our producer, Mabobo Luka, as well as Didi Malo, our technical producer. Of course, she stays here while Mabo and I have the pleasure of being off enjoying our weekend. Yes, Didi Malo, we do feel for you. But you will have the amazing company of Sheila Ndikumana, who is up next with African Diaries. For myself and the team, do enjoy the rest of your evening and your weekend. Keep safe.
Cheers to rest and renewal. Festive African greetings from Channel Africa.